Okay, in the first video, I talked about the background of Occupy Wall Street for some of you who might not know much about what it was. And I talked about how I worked right next door to it at the time it was going on, so I saw it from the beginning, the middle, and the end. So really, in this video, I want to talk about what some insights into it and things that I witnessed from a firsthand perspective. So the main point that I want to emphasize is that this happened in a very small space. They're talking about occupying Wall Street. They were just the main occupying was going on in this very small park. So you look at the photos there, and you can look at the photos on Google. It doesn't really give you an idea of just how small this space was. Because if you're actually there, it's hard to believe. So I used to go to lunch in Zuccotti Park, in this area where it happened. I went there on my lunch breaks before the Occupy movement started and after. And there were several times after the whole thing was all done that I'd be talking to somebody on my lunch break, and I would say to them, "Hey, do you know that this area right here is where Occupy Wall Street happened?" And they would look at me like, "Really?" And I'd say, "Yeah, like just in the confines of this space where like where we're sitting right now." And that, like, people were kind of awestruck by that this whole thing, this movement that attracted national and international attention, that inspired similar protests in other places, that it all happened in this very small park. So it's significant because I think it speaks a lot to why some of the problems with it, because it had these grand ambitions, especially early on, and it never really was what it wanted to be, I think. So early on, these people are eventually, there's these things going on, especially in that area, the financial district, and there's somewhat of a focus on the influence of big corporations in politics. So we were only a couple years removed at that time from what happened in 2008 in the economy, and you can look that up because that is significant. And so one of the things that happened after all of that, and after there was a lot of trouble in the economy, is that a lot of big corporations that were in some ways responsible for what happened, that they were helped out by the government. There was this idea of too big to fail. And a lot of people also felt that these large corporations and the billionaires who own them had way too much influence. There was, especially Occupy, maybe their most successful slogan from this whole time was the idea, the 99%. This was something they spoke about a lot, that they were fighting, broadly speaking, for the 99%. And this was the 99% of people in the country or in the world, and the 1% that they were not fighting for or fighting against was the wealthiest 1% of people, who they felt had way too much influence over the other 99%. And this I think was something people could latch onto at first. But what exactly the goals and tactics were beyond that were kind of unfocused in the beginning, and they became less focused over the time of the Occupy movement. So at first there was, like I said, kind of this focus on the influence of money in politics and the overall economy, but there wasn't really, beyond maybe repealing a couple of laws. Like, now I would talk to the people there in the encampments, and there were some things, you look at their signs or talk to them, they wanted certain reforms or certain repeals of certain laws, and maybe they were against the bailouts or that happened or something like that. But then it started to feel like all these other left-wing causes or interests were converging on the Occupy movement, converging on Zuccotti Park. Like, I saw once, there was a bus that was there, and representatives from a local labor union were asking people to come with them and join some kind of protest that seemed to be for the interests of a labor union. And then I started to see just a lot of different, I think there were environmental causes, feminist causes, a lot of different groups and interests were converging on the Occupy space. And it seemed to become more jumbled. It seemed to become less focused. And you're just seeing this going on indefinitely. All these tents, the People's Library, which was a library with books there, and people using the local fast food places for the bathroom. It started to seem kind of like a joke. I mean, me, like other people who lived and worked in that area, we're just every day just seeing tents and just seeing people sitting there, and sometimes they weren't doing anything and just sometimes hanging out, or sometimes going to some march or protest or something like that. And it's just going on, and the whole occupying the space got attention at first because it seemed like something different, but they weren't really it wasn't even big enough, this space that they were occupying, to really disrupt much of anything. You just kind of walked around it, and sometimes I would walk in there. I had some friends who were, worked for corporations too, and they at first were worried that they'd be heckled or something. And no, it wasn't really like that. People were, fairly friendly. They weren't very hostile. They seemed to sometimes have good intentions. I think they had good intentions overall, but I do agree that I think some vagrants, people who possibly wanted free food or just a place to stay, that did start to happen later on, that they were just there for that, because just from the look of the people who were there, looked like they were maybe homeless or something like that. And it just never really matured. It never really took on anything concrete. And it just seemed to go on indefinitely in this small space, not really disrupting anything, not really bringing attention to anything more that people could latch on to besides the idea of the 99% versus the 1%. And it just, one day, I was there and it was mostly gone. That the mayor agreed to send a crew to just take the people out overnight and demolish the encampment overnight. And that was it. And there were some attempts later on to bring it back, but it never really happened. And as someone who witnessed the whole thing, I can understand why. It just It was a leaderless movement as well. I know it was copying what went on in the Arab protests, I think particularly in Egypt. But in Egypt, they had more of a narrow focus. They wanted to remove the regime that ruled Egypt. So whatever else was going on there, that was one thing that a lot of people rallied around. But in the Occupy movement, it didn't. I mean, people could latch on to the idea of the 99%, but beyond that, how were they going to take away that influence of the 1% versus the 99%? And then on top of that, all these other interests converged on Zuccotti Park. And as I said, the whole size of it just made it look unfocused and look like really it wasn't really anything. And there wasn't a seriousness to it that you saw with the protests in 2020, for example. It didn't have that gravity to it. So that's I'm going to try to keep it short with that, but if you have comments on it, if you witnessed it, if you think it has more of a legacy than what I've talked about, then leave it in the comments. And other people, if you were there, maybe if you were part of it, leave it there. So that's it